Scenes like these are the stuff of dreams, travel agents' windows, and commercials for everything from soft drinks to credit cards. Turquoise sea, swaying palms, white coral sand, they're the clichés of tropical travel. However, behind the everyday beauty of these particular islands in the sun, there lies a long and mysterious history. A cattle egret peers down confidently into a marketplace full of bustle, colour and sunlight. It could be anywhere in the tropics, but it's the Seychelles, remote in the West Indian Ocean and unique in the world. It's not their beauty which sets the islands apart. They may be the loveliest in the world, but only by a short head. It's certainly not the tropical trinkets in the markets of Mahe, the principal island. You can find items like these anywhere on the equator, though the size and quality of shells from other reefs might not quite match them. What makes the Seychelles unique is to be found away from the tourist trail, in the forests and woodlands of the interior. The forests are relics of a very distant time, when these islands were part of the lost continent of Gondwana. About 65 million years ago, this section of Gondwana broke apart to become India and Africa. The Seychelles were left behind in the middle of what is now the Western Indian Ocean. Until 200 years ago, when humans first settled here, no mammal had set foot in these forests. In that 200 years, the capital city of Victoria has grown up. The extensive mangrove forests which surrounded the shore have been cut down, along with most of the lowland forests inland. And the Seychelles have changed from a virtually unknown colony to an independent republic and a famous holiday destination. In 1979, they became the centre of the world's first marine mammal sanctuary, covering the whole of the Western Indian Ocean. Once there was a small whaling station on Mahe. Now a few humpbacked whales and many sperm whales live serenely in the crystal waters, away from the track of all but the most adventurous shipping. The Whale Sanctuary is only one of the initiatives which have made the Seychelles important as pioneers of conservation. The bird life of the islands is extraordinary. Many species are found nowhere else in the world, like the Seychelles blue pigeon and the Seychelles black parrot. Here's the Seychelles black paradise flycatcher, which lives in remnants of the ancient forests. In the old days, the Seychelles giant tortoise was another important inhabitant of those forests. The Seychelles are often described as 1,600 kilometres from anywhere, in the middle of an empty ocean. There are 3 principal islands, but one very small one, called Kusan, will also be important in the story of the ancient forests. Isolated from the mainland, watered by monsoon rains and mountain mists, the forests develop along a line of their own. Many of the forest plants are species which are quite distinct from their surviving relatives on either side of the ocean. One is a giant pitcher plant, which lives by enticing insects into a pool of digestive fluids. It feeds on creatures, some of which are even now unknown to science. The frogs which live here are typical of many of the forest's animals. One species has become extinct everywhere except here, though others, like tree frogs, have relatives living in Africa to this day. The unique Seychelles species are echoes from an ancient past, when these forests were part of a much greater landmass. In the mountain streams, there's a local species of killifish, a kind of carp, along with the tree frogs developing froglets. How did these species make their way here? The answer often is that they didn't. They've been here all along, like the freshwater prawn and the water scorpion, almost certainly relics of the old days when this stream flowed down into a river on a vast continental plain. There are some native mammals here, apart from those which arrived with the people. They're bats, whose ancestors must have been blown across the ocean by the storms long ago. The big fruit bat, or flying fox, has evolved into a species unique to the islands. Some groups of birds are good at colonising islands, though others rarely manage it. The blue pigeon is a very ancient inhabitant of the Seychelles, quite distinct from its nearest relatives elsewhere. Because their muscular gizzard crushes the seeds of the fruits which they eat, blue pigeons don't spread their food plants like other pigeons. They depend for their survival on the survival of the forests. Another Seychelles bird, the bulbul, is an example of the threat to the native species from introduced birds brought into the islands by people. It's gradually been displaced by the Indian myna, which began as a cage bird, but is now all too successful in the wild. People take birds with them wherever they go, and the settlers in the Seychelles were no exception. The Madagascar foddy, a small weaver finch, was popular as a cage bird because of the glorious red breeding dress of the males, which earned them the nickname cardinal. The barred ground dove is an elegant little bird to have in one's backyard, so it was brought in as well. Now, together with the myna, these are the three most common birds in the islands. Although the Seychelles as a group are just a handful of dots on the map of the Indian Ocean, each of the main islands has its own character. The type of woodland which grows on it dictates the type of animal which can live there. On Praslin, for example, is a palm forest like no other anywhere in the world. The tall trees are the palms of the Seychelles double coconut, called the coco de mer, because for centuries before the islands were discovered, it was thought to be the fruit of some giant underwater plant when it was washed up on the shores of India. When General Gordon, later of Khartoum, came to the Seychelles, he became convinced that the Valley de Mai, where the palms grow, was the original Garden of Eden, and the coco de mer, with its strangely suggestive fruits and its phallic male flower spike, was the tree of knowledge. He must have been immensely excited, believing that he was walking in Adam's footsteps. His excitement is matched today by that of biologists, who explore the palm forest to find that many of the animals in it are found only in this one small valley in the whole world. The colourful little day gecko is found all over the islands, not just on Praslin, but the spectacular white slugs depend on the palm for their continued existence. The Valley de Mai has its own bird, the Seychelles black parrot. It feeds on flowers and fruits in and around the valley, its whistling calls echoing among the palm trunks. Wherever fragments of the ancient forest survive, they support their own unique forms of life. On La Digue, the third of the main islands, the forest hums and buzzes with insects. The damp, steamy woods are the home of an insect-eating bird, the Seychelles black paradise flycatcher. The world population is now only 100 individuals. The female is the more brightly coloured. This species now lives only on La Digue, in mainly marshy places, where the canopy is high enough above the undergrowth to give it room to chase its prey. La Digue is very densely populated, but one part of the woodland has been set aside as a sanctuary for the flycatcher. A few kilometres away lies the rocky island of Arid. As its name suggests, it's rather short of water, but it's an important breeding island for seabirds. A large colony of sooty terns nests there between May and October. On other islands, sooty tern eggs are collected for human consumption, but on Arid, which is a wildlife sanctuary, they're left in peace. Arid's woodland is an unusual setting for breeding sooty terns. Elsewhere they breed in packed colonies in the open, but here their chicks scuttle about in the leaf litter, dodging the angry bills of parents whose eggs have not yet hatched. From time to time, a few red-tailed tropic birds nest here, their only breeding place in the Seychelles. Any species is in danger if its home is on only one island, and the Seychelles have 5 such endangered species. One of the rarest lives on a small island where a remarkable transformation has taken place since 1969, when it was established as a sanctuary. It's Cousin, less than 25 hectares of priceless wildlife. It's idyllic, another travel agent's poster brought to life. It lies just off the coast of Pralin, about 2 kilometres away, but it's another world. As on all the islands of the Seychelles, the real glories of Cousin are behind the perfect beach, in the squawking cacophony of the dense and shady woodland. The latest chapter of Cousin's story began when it was bought with funds raised by public subscription in Britain and set up as a sanctuary. This island belongs to the birds, the sign says, and to one bird in particular. It's a drab-coloured creature, but a beautiful singer, called the Seychelles warbler, Cousin's own one-island species. Since 1969, when the population was down to 39 birds, some have been moved to Cousin, next door, and to Arid, visible on the horizon. The world population is now nearly 1,000. There are warblers nesting throughout the year in the thicker bushes round the edge of the forest. Because the island is so small, new breeding territories are hard to find. Young birds stay with their parents to help rear the next brood instead of looking for somewhere else to live. The young helper passes the food to its mother on the nest, and she passes it round the family. The transformation of Cousin since 1969 has been spectacular. What used to be a coconut plantation, with trim grass and palms in ordered rows, has become a forest. This used to be a little village with a rack for drying coconuts in the sun. Now the roots of giant fig trees snake through the masonry, supporting a closed canopy over 15 metres high, and the sun is practically invisible through the foliage. Many of the palms have died and fallen, but those which survive still produce coconuts. Left to themselves, the fallen nuts would produce a dense coconut palm forest. To encourage the regrowth of the natural lowland forest trees, the coconut seedlings must be cut down. Fortunately, Cousin was never completely cultivated, so that enough of the old lowland trees survived to seed the whole plantation. Under a regime of benign neglect, the ancient forest has returned. Among the principal beneficiaries have been the lesser noddies. These delicate dark terns are among the very few seabirds which nest in trees. In 1969, there was only a small colony on the island. Now they cover the area where the coconuts used to grow. The nest is built chiefly of seaweed, collected wet and allowed to set into a solid platform. One parent broods the chick while the other goes fishing. In spite of the sturdiness of the nest and the close attention of their parents, from time to time noddy chicks fall to the ground. Their parents never feed them once they've gone from the nest. The chicks are doomed to become part of the energy cycle of the forest floor. One of the birds whose chicks almost never fall is the fairy tern. The chick, when it hatches, has the biggest feet for its size of any bird. Unusually for a seabird, it has long, sharp claws. Anywhere the mother can balance an egg, the chick can hang on. The fairy tern is related to the noddies. Some people call it the white noddy, and its grace and delicacy make it the favourite of all tropical travellers. Fairy terns used to be common all over the Seychelles, but their population has declined on the larger islands because of predation by barn owls. The owls were introduced to control rats, but they ate the terns instead. On Kusan, wandering barn owls are killed on sight, and the fairy tern flourishes. The fairy tern often breeds in trees, but it never builds a nest, laying its egg instead on a bare branch, or sometimes on a rock in full view. Their noisy courtship calls and the squeals of the noddy chicks are the predominant sounds in Kusan's forest. The tern's courtship includes mutual preening of positively surgical precision. As the forest on Kusan has reappeared, the ancient relationships between some of the animals which live in it have become more apparent. Fairy terns have always been under pressure from the Seychelles weaver birds, known locally as tok-toks, because of their call. From the way in which a tok-tok deals with a fairy tern egg, it's evident that it's not a new item in its diet. The sound of a falling egg attracts not only other tok-toks, but passing skinks as well. They are lizards, expert hunters and scavengers in the leaf litter of the forest floor. 200 years ago, before the people came, there must have been amongst the most numerous animals in the forest. The smaller species of skink still lives on most of the islands, eating everything and anything. The larger species is found only on seabird islands, where rats have never lived. Tok-toks also live on 2 other small islands, but nowhere else. They were once on Pralin, Ladigue, and other islands too, but like the larger skink and the tree-nesting seabirds, they are long gone from here. The forest on Kusan is the last indication of how things used to be. Having no predators, the skink can afford to blindfold itself, licking the last drops out of a fallen egg. Long experience has taught the tok-tok that it has nothing to fear from the skinks, as it deftly drives them away from its feeding place. The tok-tok has flourished with the growth of the trees. In 1969, there were only 100 of them on the island. Now there are over 1,000. Like most island birds, the adults have a broad-ranging diet, but their nestlings need the fat and protein which is supplied by a diet of insects. There's an interesting difference between the fortunes of the tok-tok and the warbler. The warbler population rose sharply at first while the forest was low and incomplete, from 28 to 300 in only 7 years. When the canopy closed over, the population levelled off at about 400 birds. The tok-tok, by contrast, has risen steadily in numbers with an abundance of food and plenty of suitable nesting sites. A remarkable experiment by a Swiss scientist threw some light on the response of fairy terns to the threat of marauding tok-toks. He put a tiny microphone under the egg of a sitting tern to listen to its heartbeat. The bird had been marked with a splash of red dye. Fairy terns are famous for being tame when approached by people, but the bird's pulse rate changes as a group of visitors draws near. The bird might look calm, but it's audibly terrified. It sits tight, not because it's tame, but to protect its egg from tok-toks, which will smash it if they have the chance. When the people retreat, the bird's pulse rate drops. Visitors are welcome on Cousin, but their movements are closely controlled on behalf of the birds. As the much photographed sign says, it's the birds which own the island. In fact, it's BirdLife International which runs it, but it comes to much the same thing. As they move into the interior, the visitors, many of whom are local people from the larger islands, find themselves in a forest, which is, as far as anyone can tell, much like that found by the original settlers. A skink feeding on fallen fruit from one of the native trees is joined by one of the animals of the Indian Ocean whose loss from the Seychelles was a major tragedy. Because the islands were cut off before mammals evolved, giant tortoises were once the dominant animals in the forests. They were quickly wiped out by sailors and settlers who collected them for food. The tortoises, which now live on Cousin, were almost certainly brought from Aldabra, 1,300 kilometres away, where another population survives in huge numbers. They're the same species as the original Seychelles tortoises, which were once so numerous in the lowland forests. For the first time for many years, they've begun breeding again. The baby tortoise has trouble moving about where the muddy forest floor has been churned up by the adults. You could say it's wallowing in its father's footsteps. The transformation of Cousin from coconut plantation back to dark, dense forest is only one of the conservation successes in the Seychelles. The whale sanctuary, the Vallée de Mai and magnificent underwater national parks are among the many other protected areas whose unique biology is defended from the dangers of development. But the greatest achievement in the field of conservation has been the move to restore this tiny island to its original state, as part of the ancient forests of Gondwana.